The old man stood in the torrential downpour, the chilling rain plastering thin gray hair to his scalp, his worn, threadbare coat offering little protection against the elements. He did not shiver. He did not move. He simply stood at attention, his gaze fixed on the entrance of the sprawling military cemetery, a silent, solitary sentinel, to the bustling family preparing for the funeral. He was an inconvenience, a strange, sodden figure who had appeared from nowhere and now stood stubbornly in their way. They were late. The ceremony for their patriarch, a decorated colonel, was about to begin, and this old man was a disruption they didn't have time for. The deceased son-in-law, a man named Mark, puffed out his chest, his expensive suit already spotted with rain. He was a man accustomed to being in charge, a man who saw the world as a series of obstacles to be overcome with a sharp word and a dismissive gesture. He strode toward the old man, his polished shoes sinking slightly into the mud. "Excuse me," he began, his voice dripping with condescension. "We have a funeral to attend. You're in the way." The old man didn't flinch. He didn't even turn his head. His eyes, a pale, washed-out blue, remained locked on the cemetery gates. A flicker of annoyance crossed Mark's face. "Did you hear me? I said you need to move." Still, the old man was silent. It was as if he hadn't heard, or perhaps as if Mark's words were as insignificant as the falling rain. The disrespect was palpable, a physical thing that hung in the air between them. Mark, unaccustomed to being ignored, felt a hot flush of anger. Who was this old man to defy him? To them. He was just another forgotten soul, a relic of a bygone era, weathered and worn. But what they didn't know, what they couldn't possibly comprehend, was that this quiet, unassuming figure was a living legend, a man whose past was so extraordinary, so shrouded in secrecy, that his very presence on this hallowed ground was a testament to a level of heroism they could never imagine. And in a few short moments, they were about to learn a lesson in respect that would shatter their arrogant world to its very core. Welcome to a story that reminds us that heroes walk among us, often unseen, their greatness hidden beneath a cloak of humility. A story that asks us to look beyond the surface, to see the quiet dignity in the eyes of our elders, and to remember that the deepest waters of courage often run the most silent. Before we continue, take a moment to subscribe and join our community, where we celebrate the tales of unsung heroes and the timeless virtues of honor and respect. Now, let us return to the cemetery, where a storm of a different kind was about to break. The tension was escalating, a thick, uncomfortable silence punctuated only by the drumming of the rain. The family watched, a mixture of impatience and morbid curiosity on their faces. They saw their brother-in-law, a man of status and influence, being utterly dismissed by a nameless, penniless old man. It was an affront to their carefully constructed world, a tear in the fabric of their self-importance. Mark, his face now a mask of barely controlled fury, took another step closer, his voice low and menacing. "I'm not going to ask you again, old man. Get out of the way. Now." The old man finally turned his head, his pale blue eyes meeting Mark's for the first time. There was no fear in his gaze, no anger, only a profound and unsettling sadness. He spoke, his voice a low, gravelly whisper, a voice that seemed to carry the weight of 1,000 storms. "I'm waiting for a friend." The simplicity of the statement, the quiet finality in his tone, only served to further enrage Mark. A friend? What friend could this vagrant possibly have that would warrant such a display of obstinance? The funeral procession was about to begin, the honor guard was assembling, and this nobody was holding them up. It was more than an inconvenience. It was an insult to memory of the decorated colonel they were there to bury. Little did they know that the friend the old man was waiting for was the very man they were about to lay to rest, and their connection was forged in a crucible of fire and sacrifice that Mark and his family could never comprehend. Their shared history was a secret one, a story of valor written in the blood and dust of forgotten war, a story that was about to be dramatically and publicly revealed. The rain continued to fall, a curtain of gray separating the world of the arrogant and the world of the humble, a world where true honor is not measured in medals and accolades, but in the quiet, unwavering loyalty of a friend. The man at the center of this unfolding drama, the quiet hero of our story, was known to the few who knew him at all simply as Father. He lived a life of quiet solitude on the outskirts of a small town, a life of routine and repetition that seemed designed to be as unremarkable as possible. He was a widower, his wife having passed years before, and his only family was a daughter, Sarah, who had married into a world of wealth and privilege, a world that father had never understood and had never tried to be a part of. Sarah's husband, Mark, was a man who measured worth in stock portfolios and social connections, a man who saw father's simple life not as a choice, but as a failure. To Mark, father was an anachronism, a relic of a past he had no interest in understanding. He was a quiet, unassuming father-in-law who would sit in the corner during family gatherings, his silence a stark contrast to the boisterous, self-congratulatory chatter of Mark and his friends. They saw his worn hands, the slight limp in his gait, the distant look in his pale blue eyes, and they dismissed him. They saw a man who had amounted to nothing, a man who had nothing to offer their world of glittering success. They did not see the faded tattoo on his forearm, a barely perceptible insignia of an elite, clandestine unit, a unit whose very existence was a closely guarded secret. They did not see the network of faint scars that crisscrossed his back and chest, each one a silent testament to a battle fought and won in the shadows. They did not know that the limp was a result of a fall from a helicopter during a covert operation, a fall that had nearly cost him his life, a fall he had taken to save a fellow soldier, a young lieutenant who would one day become a decorated colonel. The arrogance of the antagonists of Mark and his family was born of a profound and willful ignorance. They judged father based on the superficial, on the humble trappings of his quiet life, and in doing so, they revealed their own shallowness, their own inability to recognize true greatness when it stood before them. They were the perfect foils of father's quiet honor, their loud, empty pronouncements of their own importance a hollow echo against the solid, unshakable foundation of his character. They were a family that had everything and stood for nothing, a stark contrast to the man who had nothing and had stood for everything that mattered. Their world was one of appearances, of carefully curated images and performative success. Father's world was one of substance, of quiet integrity and unspoken sacrifice. And on this rainy day, at the funeral of a man they claimed to honor, these two worlds were about to collide in a way that would leave one of them shattered and the other, finally, understood. The inciting incident, the moment that set this inevitable collision course in motion, came not with a bang but with a quiet, dismissive wave of a hand. The funeral procession was finally beginning to move, the hearse carrying the flag-draped casket of the colonel starting its slow, solemn journey towards a gravesite. The family, still flustered and annoyed by the presence of the old man, hurried to their cars, eager to get out of the rain and get on with performative grief that the day required. Mark, having failed to intimidate father into leaving, decided on a different tactic: public humiliation. As he walked past the old man, he paused, a cruel smirk playing on his lips. "You know," he said, his voice loud enough for the other family members to hear, "it's a private ceremony for family and friends. Not for everyone." The implication was clear, the insult as sharp and cutting as a piece of broken glass. He was dismissing father as a nobody, a stranger who had no right to be there, no right to share in their grief. He was, in a single, condescending sentence, attempting to erase father's presence, to render him invisible. Father did not react. He did not argue. He did not defend himself. He simply stood his ground, his gaze still fixed on the procession, his silence a wall against which Mark's arrogance crashed and broke. This public dismissal, this deliberate act of humiliation, was a spark that would ignite the fire to reveal. It was the moment that the narrative shifted, the moment that the stakes were raised. It was no longer just a matter of an old man being in the way. It was a matter of honor, of respect, of a debt that was about to be paid in full. The quiet hero had been challenged, his silent dignity questioned, his right to be there denied. But what Mark and his family didn't understand was that father's right to be there was not something that could be granted or denied by them. It was a right that had been earned, a right that had been paid for in blood and sweat and sacrifice, a right that was about to be validated in the most dramatic and unexpected way imaginable. The stage was now set for the rising action, for the escalation of disrespect that would only serve to make the final reveal all the more powerful, all the more satisfying. The seeds of their own humiliation had been sown, and the harvest was fast approaching. As the funeral service began, the rain softened to a persistent drizzle, casting a somber, gray pall over the assembled mourners. The family huddled under a large canopy near the gravesite, their dark, expensive clothing a stark contrast to the vibrant green of the manicured lawn. Father, still standing by the entrance, remained exposed to the elements, a solitary figure against the backdrop of weeping willows and weathered headstones. He was close enough to hear the eulogies, the carefully crafted words of praise for the deceased colonel, but far enough away to remain an outsider, a silent observer on the periphery of their grief. The disrespect, however, did not cease with the start of the ceremony. It continued, a low, persistent hum of condescension that underscored the entire affair. The observer in this drama, the audience surrogate, was a young man named David, a junior-ranking soldier who was part of the honor guard. He was a respectful, observant young man, a man who had been taught to revere his elders and honor the traditions of the military. From his position at the edge of the ceremony, he had a clear view of both the grieving family and the lone figure of the old man, and he noticed things. He noticed where the old man stood, the ramrod-straight posture that spoke of years of military discipline. He noticed where the old man's gaze never wavered from the casket, a look of profound, personal grief in his eyes. And then he noticed a tattoo. As the old man raised a hand to wipe the rain from his face, his coat sleeve slipped back, revealing for a fleeting moment the faded insignia on his forearm. David's eyes widened in recognition. He had seen that insignia before, in history books, in classified briefings, in the stories whispered in hushed tones by seasoned veterans. It was a mark of a legend, the symbol of a unit so elite, so secretive, that its members were ghosts, their names and records wiped from the official archives. This old man, this silent, unassuming figure being treated with such casual contempt, was a hero of the highest order. The realization sent a jolt for the young soldier, a mixture of awe and outrage. He looked at the family, at their self-important posturing, their performative sorrow, and he felt a surge of anger. They were oblivious, their arrogance a shield against the truth that stood just a few yards away. The rising action was not just about the escalating disrespect from the antagonists. It was also about the dawning awareness of the observer. David's recognition of the tattoo was a key that would unlock the mystery, the catalyst that would set in motion the final, dramatic reveal. He knew he had to do something, to say something, but the rigid protocols of the ceremony held him in check. For now, all he could do was watch, his heart pounding in his chest, as the ignorant continued to unwittingly dishonor the honorable. The tension was now at its peak, the air thick with unspoken truths and dramatic irony. The audience, through David's eyes, was now fully aware of who Father was, and the wait for his vindication was almost unbearable. The stage was set for the climax, for the arrival of the witness, for the moment when the truth would finally and powerfully be revealed. The final prayer had been said, the last eulogy delivered. The honor guard, including the young soldier David, stood at attention, their rifles held at the ready for the three-volley salute. The air was heavy with a sense of finality, the somber notes of a lone bugler preparing to play taps hanging in the damp air. It was in this moment of quiet reverence that the climax of our story arrived, not with a whisper, but with the measured, rhythmic tread of polished boots on wet pavement. A black, unmarked sedan had pulled up to the cemetery entrance, and from it emerged a man who commanded immediate and absolute respect. He was a 4-star general, his uniform adorned with a dazzling array of medals and ribbons, each one a testament to a long and distinguished career. He was flanked by 2 other men, both in their late 50s, both with a hard, lean look of men who had spent their lives in the crucible of special operations. They were Father's former comrades, his brothers in arms, the men who had served with him in the shadows, the men who knew the truth of his quiet heroism. The general, a man whose presence could silence a room with a single glance, strode purposefully toward the gravesite, his eyes scanning the crowd until they found the lone figure, the old man. A look of profound respect, of deep and abiding reverence, crossed the general's face. He stopped a few feet from Father, his heels clicking together as he snapped to attention, his hand raised in a crisp, perfect salute. The crowd, which had been murmuring and shifting restlessly, fell silent, They watched in stunned disbelief as this high-ranking officer, this legend of the modern military, paid homage to the disheveled old man they had so callously dismissed. The power dynamic had shifted. The world turned on its axis in the space of a single, silent gesture. The general then turned to the family, his eyes cold and hard, his voice cutting through the silence like a surgeon's scalpel. He did not raise his voice. He simply spoke, his words carrying the weight of absolute authority. "I am General Matthews," he began, his gaze sweeping over the astonished faces of Mark and his family. "And I was a commanding officer of the man you see standing before you, the man you have treated with such utter disrespect." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. He then began to speak of father's past, of a life of service so extraordinary, so filled with acts of selfless courage, that it seemed to belong to the realm of myth, not reality. He spoke of covert operations in the world's most dangerous places, of missions so secret they were never recorded, of battles fought and won against overwhelming odds. He spoke of the lives father had saved, of the men he had carried on his back through enemy fire, of the quiet, unassuming leadership that had earned him the undying loyalty and respect of all who had served with him. And then he spoke of the limp, of the fall from a helicopter, of the young lieutenant whose life father had saved at the cost of his own health, the young lieutenant who had gone on to become the decorated colonel they were now burying. He spoke of the faded tattoo on father's forearm, the insignia of a unit so elite that its members were living legends, their names whispered in awe in the halls of power. As he spoke, he gestured to a member of his staff, who brought forward a display case. Inside, on a bed of rich, blue velvet, was a medal, not just any medal, but the Medal of Honor, the nation's highest award for valor, an award so rare, so sacred, that its recipients are considered national treasures. This medal, the general said, his voice thick with emotion, was awarded to this man for his actions on the day he saved the colonel's life. He refused to accept it. He said he was just doing his duty. He said the real heroes were the ones who didn't make a home. The general paused. His gaze returned to father, a look of profound admiration in his eyes. "This man," he said, his voice now ringing with a power that seemed to shake the very ground beneath their feet, "is a hero, a true American hero. And you are not worthy to stand in his shadow." The reveal was complete. The truth, in all its stunning dramatic glory, had been laid bare. The unassuming old man had been vindicated, his quiet dignity restored, his heroic past finally and publicly acknowledged. The climax had been reached, the emotional crescendo of the narrative, and the only sound that could be heard was the soft, steady rhythm of the falling rain, a sound that seemed to now be washing away the last vestiges of ignorance and arrogance from this sacred ground. The general's words hung in the air, each one a hammer blow to the fragile egos of Mark and his family. Their faces, once masks of smug superiority, were now a canvas of shame and disbelief. They stood in stunned silence, their eyes wide with mixture of horror and a dawning, sickening understanding. The man they had mocked, the man they had dismissed, the man they had tried to humiliate, was a hero of a stature they could barely comprehend. They had not just been wrong, they had been profoundly, unforgivably wrong. Their world, built on a foundation of wealth and status, had been shattered by the simple, undeniable truth of a life lived with honor. The antagonists were shamed into a silence so deep, so profound, that it seemed to suck the very air from around them. There were no apologies, no excuses, no attempts to justify their behavior. There was nothing to say. Their words, once so sharp and cutting, were now as useless as ashes in wind. Their honor, the false, performative honor they had so proudly displayed, had been stripped away, leaving them exposed and small in the face of true greatness. Father's honor, on the other hand, was restored not by his own words, but by the powerful, authoritative testimony of a man who knew the truth. He had not sought this vindication, had not asked for this public recognition. He had simply stood his ground, his quiet dignity his only shield. And now, in the aftermath of the reveal, he remained unchanged. There was no look of triumph on his face, no hint of satisfaction in his eyes. He simply nodded his head in quiet acknowledgment to the general, a silent expression of gratitude for a debt of honor finally paid. The falling action was not a scene of confrontation or retribution. It was a scene of quiet, reflective justice. The arrogant had been humbled, their ignorance exposed, their world turned upside down. The quiet hero had been vindicated, his honor restored, his true worth finally revealed. The balance had been restored, not through violence or anger, but through the simple, unassailable power of the truth. And as the general and his men stood at attention, a silent guard of honor around the unassuming hero, the lesson of the day began to sink in, a lesson that would echo in the minds of all who had witnessed it for years to come. The funeral ceremony concluded in a hushed, reverent silence. The three-volley salute, once a mere formality, now seemed to carry a deeper, more profound meaning. The mournful notes of taps, played by the lone bugler, echoed across the cemetery, a final, poignant tribute to the fallen colonel, and in a way, to the living hero who had saved him so many years ago. As the honor guard marched away and the crowd began to disperse, Father remained where he had stood throughout the ceremony, a silent, solitary figure in the rain. The general and his men approached him, their faces a mixture of respect and concern. The general placed a hand on Father's shoulder. "It was good to see you, old friend," he said, his voice soft. "It's been too long." Father simply nodded, his pale blue eyes meeting the general's. "He made it," he said, his voice a low, gravelly whisper. It was a statement, not a question, a quiet affirmation of life lived to its fullest, a life he had helped to save. The general nodded. "He did, and he never forgot what you did for him. He spoke of you often, always with the deepest respect and gratitude." A rare, faint smile touched Father's lips. He was a good man. He then turned and began to walk away, his slight limp more pronounced now, his shoulders stooped under the weight of memory and the cold, damp air. He did not look back. He did not say goodbye. He simply walked away, a quiet, unassuming hero who had come to pay his respects to a fallen comrade and had, in the process, reminded a world that had forgotten what true honor looked like. He was leaving as he had arrived, a man of few words and profound dignity, a man who asked for nothing and had given everything. The resolution of our story is not a moment of triumph or celebration. It is a moment of quiet reflection, of a lesson learned and a truth revealed. The hero, vindicated but still humble, simply fades back into the quiet solitude of his life. His work done, his duty fulfilled. The narrative comes to a close with a powerful, unspoken message that true honor is not about the medals you wear or the accolades you receive, but about the quiet, unwavering integrity of your character, about the selfless sacrifices you make when no one is watching. It is a lesson that would linger in the minds of all who were there that day, a lesson about the quiet heroes who walk among us, their greatness hidden in plain sight, waiting for those with the eyes to see and the heart to understand. And so, we are left with a question that echoes in the silence left by the hero's quiet departure. Do we have the wisdom to look beyond the surface, to see the quiet dignity and unspoken courage in the people we meet every day? Do we have the humility to recognize that true greatness often wears the disguise of the ordinary? This story, like so many others we share, is a reminder that the world is full of unsung heroes, of quiet professionals who have served and sacrificed without fanfare or recognition. They are our fathers, our grandfathers, our neighbors, the silent sentinels of a generation that understood the meaning of duty, honor, and country. They ask for nothing from us, but we owe them everything. We owe them our respect, our gratitude, and our remembrance. What did this story make you feel? Have you ever had an encounter with a quiet hero, a moment that changed your perspective and reminded you of what truly matters? Share your thoughts and your stories in the comments below. Let's start a conversation about the quiet heroes in our own lives, the men and women who have shown us the true meaning of character and courage. And if you were moved by this story, if you believe that these tales of honor and vindication need to be told, then please subscribe to our channel. Join our community of storytellers and truth seekers, and help us keep the flame of remembrance alive for the heroes who walk among us, their legacies written not in stone, but in the quiet, indelible ink of a life well lived. The aftermath of that rainy day at the cemetery was a quiet, almost imperceptible shift in the dynamics of the family. The arrogance that had once been their defining characteristic had been replaced by a quiet, gnawing shame. Mark, in particular, was a changed man. The public humiliation he had suffered at the hands of the general had been a brutal, but necessary, lesson in humility. He could no longer look at his father-in-law, the quiet man he had so callously dismissed, without seeing the shadow of the hero that lay beneath the surface. The condescending remarks, the dismissive gestures, the casual disrespect. It all vanished, replaced by a stilted, awkward deference that was almost as uncomfortable as the arrogance it had replaced. He tried to apologize, of course. He drove out to Father's small, secluded house a few days after the funeral, a bottle of expensive whiskey in his hand, a carefully rehearsed speech on his lips. But when he stood on the porch, looking into the pale, unwavering blue eyes of the old man, the words caught in his throat. What could he say? How could he apologize for a level of ignorance so profound, so complete, that it had led him to mock a man who was, in every sense of the word, his superior? He stammered a few words, something about being sorry, about not understanding, but the apology fell hollow, inadequate. Father simply nodded, his expression unreadable. He did not invite Mark in. He did not accept the whiskey. He simply stood there, a silent, imposing figure, a living embodiment of a code of honor that Mark was only just beginning to comprehend. The relationship between them was forever changed. The easy, casual contempt was gone, but so was any hope of a genuine connection. There was a gulf between them now, a chasm of experience and understanding that could never be bridged. Mark had been given a glimpse into a world he had never known existed, a world of sacrifice and courage, of loyalty and honor, and the sight had left him humbled and more than a little afraid. He had seen the quiet steel that lay beneath his father-in-law's unassuming exterior, and he knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that this was a man he had been incredibly foolish to underestimate. The story of that day at the cemetery became a quiet legend within the family, a cautionary tale whispered in hushed tones at family gatherings. The details were never fully explained to a younger generation, but the message was clear. There was more to the quiet, solitary grandfather than met the eye. The children, who had once ignored him, now looked at him with a mixture of awe and curiosity. They would watch him from a distance, trying to catch a glimpse of the hero that the general had described. They would ask their parents questions, but the answers were always vague, evasive. The truth of Father's past remained a secret, a locked room in the family history that no one had the key to open. And so life went on. Father continued his quiet, solitary existence, his days marked by the same simple routines, the same quiet dignity. He never spoke of the funeral, never mentioned the general, never acknowledged the dramatic reveal that had so profoundly altered his family's perception of him. He was a man who lived in the present, a man who had long ago made peace with his past. He had not asked for his story to be told, had not sought the recognition or the accolades. He had simply come to say goodbye to a friend, and in doing so, had inadvertently opened a door to his past, a door that he kept firmly closed for decades. The story of the quiet hero and the arrogant son-in-law is more than just a tale of vindication. It is a story about the nature of honor, about the difference between appearance and substance, between the loud, empty pronouncements of self-importance and the quiet, unwavering integrity of a life lived with purpose. It is a story that reminds us that the measure of a man is not found in his wealth or his status, but in the content of his character, in the quiet, selfless acts of courage and sacrifice that define his soul. And it is a story that leaves us with a lingering and perhaps unsettling question. How many other quiet heroes walk among us, their stories untold, their greatness hidden in plain sight, waiting for a moment, a reveal, a witness to bring their truth to light?